Good afternoon, everyone. We have folks joining us via Zoom. Hello, welcome. And to those joining us in person, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to grab food and get a seat. We do have some seats right in front of me, so it's a back corner. And if we need more chairs, we'll certainly grab some for you. My name is Beatriz Cantada. I use the she pronoun series. I'm the Director of Engagement for Diversity and Inclusion in the Institute Community Equity Office. So before we begin, I do want to express some gratitude and acknowledgements. So to my ICO team, comprised of Divya Matthew, Paulina Wolf, Aisha Guvenelier, and Molly McInerney, and our AV team, Richard, for making this event possible. And mind you, this is a hybrid event, so I'm really excited that we're able to provide this format for our MIT community members and beyond. I also like to thank our senior leadership support, Provost Cindy Barnhart, and Institute Community and Equity Officer John Dozier, our colleagues at Lincoln Lab, our speakers faculty, Professor Claire Season, and I'm excited to see that many of our scholars are joining us in person. So this is the current cohort. We have Brandon Ogbunu, Moriba Jah, Javed Drake, Daniel Auguste, Wasilu Jaco, Louis Masaya, and Brian Nord. Note that we will be recording this session. There will be an opportunity towards the end of the talk for Conversu Sabi, and that is, thank you, and that is reflection and conversation. Yes, I had to practice that last night, and I Googled it just to make sure I could pronounce it. Live captioning is also available. So subscribe to our newsletter at ico.mit.edu if you'd like to hear more about our events and future presentations with our MLK scholars. Before we begin, I do want to say our next event is on Tuesday, March 21st with Javed Drake. So he's our other MLK scholar. So again, if you want more information, definitely flag me down or any of my ICO team members. About our speaker. Dr. Eunice Ferreira is an associate professor of theater at Skidmore College, where she is a recent recipient of a Mellon Periclean grant to support creative collaborations and civic engagement with local organizations. She is a scholar artist whose research, teaching, and directing focus on race, representation, and artists of the global majority. Areas of expertise include multilingual performance, theater history, translation studies, mixed race performance, theater for social justice and change, musical theater, new play development, and theater of Cape Verde, her ancestral home. She earned her master's in arts in directing from Emerson College and a PhD in theater history from Tufts University. She is happy to join MIT, where, in addition to her research projects, she is teaching Black Theater Matters and mixed race theater and film, special topics courses that invite students of all backgrounds and levels of theater experience for a semester of critical engagement and creativity. She also invites you to follow her teaching Instagram account at BIPOC Theater, where you can spot the work of MIT students. So without further ado, I invite Dr. Eunice Ferreira to the floor, and let's welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming to the party this afternoon. Thank you for Richard, our DJ back there, who was spinning some Cape Verdean songs for us. Hello and greetings to everyone out there on Zoom land. Send my greetings to administration, to the faculty and staff of MIT, family, friends who I know are also on Zoom, current and former students who are here, even wearing their Black Theater Matters t-shirt from last semester, and some students who aren't even in class with me right now. So like, how much more special is that? And to my colleagues in the MLK Scholars Program, thank you today for the catered lunch, for the hands that made that food for us, for the Cape Verdean side dishes and dessert. I hope you all try. I'm sorry I didn't bring bottles of Tabasco sauce, which would be out at my house. Do not shame Tabasco, okay? I like Tabasco. And the food today was, the Cape Verdean food comes from Nos Casa, which means our house, Nos Casa Cafe, which is in Roxbury, Mass. There are QR codes on the table where you can scan in later for the Instagram teaching account, the Cape Verdean playlist that I curated for you, and a link to Nos Cafés so you can support them. I want to thank my host department, Music and Theater Arts, and my colleagues who are here. And special thanks to my faculty host, Claire Conceição, to Beatriz Cantado, Paulina Wolf, John Dozier, and everyone in the Institute Community and Equity Office for all you do, even learning how to pronounce in Crioulo, to support the MIT Visiting Scholars Program. And thank you to all of you who've so graciously welcomed me, invited me to lunch, invited me to the theater. Yes, Professor Alexander, thank you, and welcomed me. Thank you, obrigada. So I was asked to share some of my personal journey in academia, along with some of my research with you today. So I'll introduce you to some facets of Cape Verdean theater. Oh, let's get some slides up there. You don't want to keep looking at me on Zoom. No, you don't. And I don't. Don't look at my messy desktop there. Sorry. Sorry, I didn't realize that we weren't connected. It's not messing. Okay, there we go. So today I'll introduce you to some facets of Cape Verdean theater, talk a little bit about some of the diasporic influences and community building, and how Cape Verdean performance is in conversation with Creole identities, mixed race, and transnational notions of Blackness. I won't necessarily progress through these points in that order, but we'll move around like points on a map. So as a Cape Verdean American and Rhode Island homegirl, go Red Sox, Creole dreams have been a constant part of my past, present, and future. That's me and my mom in New Bedford, where many Cape Verdeans landed and where there's still a huge Cape Verdean diasporic community. Creole dreams carried my ancestors and many other Cape Verdeans looking to escape drought, famine, and the limits of life and possibilities under Portuguese colonialism. Although my family didn't arrive in the US until the 1960s, Cape Verdeans started migrating in the late 18th and early 19th century as workers on whaling ships, thus New Bedford as a landing point, and soon New England became home to the largest population of Cape Verdeans outside the West African islands, and to this day we are. They mostly settled in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and after the heyday of the whaling industry, they found work on the docks, the fishing vessels, Cape Cod cranberry bogs, and as my family did, in the textile industries and in manufacturing. So the title of my talk today is called Mapping Creole Dreams. And I think about map and maps as both noun and verb, and how they figure both literally and metaphorically in how I think about my work. So let's start by looking at a map. This is a great map. So let me tell you a story about this map, and my son's going to be so embarrassed that I'm sharing this. He's 17 now, but he first did this when he was about 8 years old. Do you remember getting worksheets in school? Right, Brandon, and you had to identify, color in. Well, first of all, Sam never colors within the lines. That's just a part of his personality, okay? And what moves me so much about this image is the intervention, right? Like I'm just getting emotional thinking about that. This 8-year-old boy said, wait a minute, where is Cape Verde? Where is Cape Verde? I know that's where my family is from. Now, it's not an accurate depiction of how the islands are laid out, but I appreciate the intent that Sam made an intervention to put Cape Verde on the map. Even in a classroom at Skidmore, this is not the exact map, but there's a map, something like this, in a classroom at Skidmore. And again, Cape Verde is left out. So when things are not mapped, it can render those places invisible and excluded from discourse. And in my field, in theater history research. So my goal is a book-length study to map Cape Verde as a crucial site for not only theater and performance studies scholars and artists, but also for some of you in the room, sociologists, linguists, critical mixed race folks, literature folks, ethnomusicologists, and general readers to conceptualize and expand notions of what it means to be mixed, Creole, Black, and/or African, and hopefully add to the rich spectrum of theater of Africa and the African diaspora. So let's just look at some other maps just so that we can geographically situate Cape Verde. You can see that it's a group of islands just about 400 miles off of where the African continent sort of juts out, right, before it starts to come down again. So off of Guinea-Bissau and Senegal. It's just the landmass is just a little bit bigger than my home state of Rhode Island. And the population is about half the population of Rhode Island. So Rhode Island is just a little bit over 1 million. Cape Verde population is about 575,000. So Cape Verde offers a rich opportunity to examine theater at the crossroads of Africa, Europe, and the Americas. There's a sort of triangular, relationship where Cape Verde is, where Portugal is, the former metropole, and then the United States. So Cape Verde's unique colonial history and geographical location, part of Africa, right? If we go back to that map again, part of Africa, but not part of the continent of Africa, is central to the negotiation of Cape Verdean identity and how the Republic of Cape Verde positions itself on the global stage. So Cape Verde offers this really unique perspective on post-colonial and Creole theory. The islands, let's go back to a picture of the islands again. So the islands were supposedly uninhabited when the Portuguese claimed them. There was no indigenous culture per se to colonize, right? So it's very unique in that way. It played a significant role, unfortunately, in the transatlantic slave trade because the Portuguese were excellent slavers and as a departing point just off the West African coast where slaves were prepared or Christianized before being transported, mostly in the beginning to Brazil. And then the former metropole of Portugal continues to influence the economy of Cape Verde in its many private holdings and governmental interventions, and theater is no exception. So there's a type of neo-colonialism going on. So theater performance offers sites to reimagine and remap the study of global Creole performances by focusing on what is widely considered the first Creole society. Sorry, mon frère. The emphasis on the Caribbean and Creole studies has often overshadowed the study of the Creole cultures, particularly in the field of theater studies. But you see, my brother is here to support me, right? We are all in this together. I hope that my work makes a unique contribution to theater studies, Lusophone studies, which focuses on the Portuguese language, African studies, Cape Verdean studies, Creole studies, and the still emerging field of critical mixed race studies. So I think first I need to just define how I'm using the word Creole and how Cape Verdeans use it. So we say Creole, Crioulo, spelled with a C, Creole spelled with a K, like within Haitian Creole, the use of the K, Crioulo. And the word can be used to describe the language, the culture, and the people, right? It can be used in all those sort of different ways. Here I have a picture from Carnaval. This is from, I think, like 2005. Carnaval just ended in Cape Verde. My mom's a travel agent. She sold lots of tickets because that's when a lot of Cape Verdeans want to go back so they can party on the islands. So in thinking about this Creole culture, language and multilingualism are defining characteristics of Creole cultures, right, in general. And for Cape Verdean theater, they figure prominently for these artists as they choose from a variety of available options. Because although the official language of Cabo Verde is Portuguese, the most widely spoken language is the Cape Verdean language, more commonly known as Crioulo or Cabo Verdeano. And much like with Haitian Creole, there is tension about how the language is presented orthographically how it's deemed official, and then trying for the language to become an official language of the country. So Crioulo is a blend of Portuguese with West African languages, and it's believed to have originated as a means for communication during the transatlantic slave trade, and supposedly influenced some of the Creole that you find in the Caribbean. The main island is strategically located. It has this outpost called Ribeira Grande that later on they renamed Cidade Velha, or the Old City. And so rooted in its history and this mid-Atlantic position that Cape Verde has, the Crioulo culture of Cabo Verde is a result of centuries of mutual, sometimes forced, sometimes voluntary influence of African and European people. Historian claims that these groups were quite distinct when the islands were first discovered in the middle of the 15th century and during the initial settlement of the islands. But eventually this gave way to what might be considered more ambiguous notions of race. And it is from this multi-ethnic, multilingual, and multiracial origin that Cape Verdeans have forged their Crioulo identity. So being here at MIT is that's not a picture of MIT. That's just another picture of Cape Verde I want to show you from the main island. So being here at MIT is a sort of homecoming for me. My academic journey is rooted in the Boston area, where I did my undergrad and graduate programs at Emerson and then at Tufts University. And as a second generation Cape Verdean American, first gen to go off to college, let alone, I wasn't even thinking about grad school. I had no plan to focus on Cape Verde when I started off as a PhD student at Tufts. And I want to really offer this to the students in the class, in our session and online, who are maybe thinking about graduate school, that I believe your passions will find you too. So I'm gonna tell you a bit how I kind of fought with that. The Cape Verdean cultural forms that traditionally have been elevated are literature, dance, and music, right? My colleague Brandon, as he was walking in, he immediately noticed music by Cesaria Evora, who was considered our sort of like Ella Fitzgerald. She's our barefoot diva and ambassador, the late ambassador of Cape Verdean culture. I never thought about the possibility of researching Cape Verdean theater. And I'm so embarrassed to say and like share that I think that part of that comes from how our minds can be colonized, of me not thinking that it was worthy of study. You know, to be honest, a part of me thought, I'm gonna fall into tokenism, right? Am I gonna do Cape Verdean theater just because I'm Cape Verdean? Right? Or maybe I thought it's not rigorous enough. Who's gonna care? That was another thing. Like, who's gonna care? Because it's not even on a map. Right? So who's gonna care about Cape Verde? Do I just study it because I'm Cape Verdean? And then in grad school, I started reading about post-colonial theories and the intersection with performance and identity. And I finally thought, maybe I should look into this. And then I didn't find anything on Cape Verdean theater, right? There was like nothing. There was like a couple of lines in encyclopedic entries that were based on a play written by a Cape Verdean who's a professor, Donaldo Macedo, professor emeritus from UMass Boston, who wrote a play about Cape Verde. But then a family friend, thank you, João Monteiro, sociologist João Monteiro, said, you know what? I think I have something that might be helpful. And he gave me these small paperback books. I mean, really, they're like half the size of me, so 4 by 5.5, something like that. He gave me these small paperback books that were published by Dr. Francisco Frugoso, otherwise known as Kwame Conde, the leader of a post-independence theater troupe called Corda Cape Verde, which means wake up. Awaken Cape Verde. I mean, the truest and purest sense of saying get woke, like wake up to what is happening to us. So as soon as I had those little notebooks in my hand, I knew there was no going back. The books found me. And that's the encouragement I want to offer to you students. They found me. And in the spirit of the troupe's title, They awakened me. It was as if those books were saying, Corda, Eunice, corda. We're emotional people. So I felt compelled to explore what Cape Verdean theater might illuminate in terms of national and cultural identity in this still very young island republic, only gaining its independence in 1975. And then also in relation to my own cultural identity. So my initial research focused on post-independence theater in Cape Verde from 1975 to 2005, with specific attention to language due to the tensions between the colonial language of Portuguese and the national language or the mother tongue of Crioulo Cabo Verdeano, or the Cape Verdean language. And that required field work was spread out over a couple of years. And in addition to more traditional research approaches, like getting into the archives and finding newspapers, I take a strong, that's me in the middle with them sort of tugging at my hair. I take a strong ethnographic approach, one that emphasizes proximity, not distant observation. That means being in rehearsal with all these fantastic people who I love, eating with them, socializing, traveling, conducting interviews, having collective discussions, helping them set up for a performance, doing workshops with them. It's an approach that privileges experiential learning, participatory learning, and knowing that they have something to teach me. So in Theater for Cape Verde, I focus on theater artists in these productions from 1975 to 2005. And the post-colonial theory that was introduced to me in graduate school offered me a way to look at, understand, and interrogate theater, particularly outside the United States and in former colonized countries. Now, my mom, hey mom, my mom has teased me that I know more about Cape Verdean culture than she does. She was born in Cape Verde, but it makes sense. Because of colonization, Cape Verdeans did not study their own language. They learned Portuguese history in school. My father had to memorize all the different kings of Portugal and all the history of Portugal. They never studied the history of themselves and of their country and of their language. And of course, African cultural roots were suppressed. When students went to school, they were, and actually to this day, many students are going to start school in a second language because Portuguese is not their first language. It's Crioulo. So post-colonial post-colonial theory focuses on looking at a period of post-liberation, right? Or post-independence of a nation formerly under colonial rule, where we find narratives that conflict or counter with the history that has been taught, where we see a multiplicity of voices, hybridity of culture, where we see, in the spirit of the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, attempts to decolonize the mind, to resist those colonial influences, to assert a cultural and a national identity of their own, of our own. We find a linguistic hybridity. We find language being used in a subversive manner, like using the language of the colonizer, but doing something with that language that's subversive. And we find models that mimic, transform, and radically oppose Eurocentric models of theater making. So I position the work of these prominent theater artists and troupes in terms of their influential contributions to theatrical practice and the historical moment from which they emerged as Cape Verde was positioning itself on the global stage. So I look at theater as a means to resist the colonial legacy in the post-immediate independence fervor. Theater as a means to reclaim regional specificities that had been oppressed, and theater as a way to recreate national identity in a global and in an international context. So I look at the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And these theater troupes are products of and they are shapers of culture, dynamically engaging audiences in the Crioulo nation's most pressing social and political issues. So even though I situate these groups, it seems like I'm presenting them as a historical timeline, I don't want to suggest by any means that there's a sort of evolutionary model, right? Like things improved or things got better. That's not the case. Rather, like the vast Atlantic Ocean that surrounds the islands, each of these periods are more like waves, and there's an ebb and flow, and they are simultaneous, right? So it's not as if the passions of the 70s dissipated as we moved into the 80s, and they all still exist. So we'll take a brief look at some of these periods. The 1970s brought the strongest movement, because it's right after independence, to decolonize Cape Verdean culture from the Portuguese influences. So in the 1975, in the fervor of this post-independence movement, emerged that theater troupe, Cor de Cabo Verde, Wake Up or Awaken Cabo Verde, led by Francisco Fregoso, a medical doctor who adopted that artistic name of Kwame Konde. He sought to create a genuinely Cape Verdean and authentically African theater. Fregoso co-founded the troupe just 2 months after independence with his brother Manuel in the capital city of Praia, which is on the main island of Santiago. And about half of the nation's inhabitants reside there, right? Half of the republics, the archipelago's inhabitants reside on the main island. And it's there where its Badiou culture, particularly emerging from the interior regions where formerly bonded West Africans escaped and found refuge. That culture, the Badiou culture, is both celebrated and contested as representative of national culture because it's the most African in its roots. Thus, it's especially significant that Santiago, traditionally referred as the most characteristically African island in the archipelago, is the birthplace of a new Crioulo national theater. So emerging at this crucial turning point in Cape Verde's history, Cor de Cabo Verde initiated an approach to Crioulo performance theory rooted in enacting political theory through cultural through cultural resistance. Excuse me. Fregoso was highly influenced by the political writings of MLK Cabral, a great African intellectual and the assassinated leader during Cabo Verde's liberation struggle. The re-Africanization theories of MLK Cabral shaped national identity and guided the pioneering work of this theater troupe. So armed, like literally like armed, armed with the tenets of Cabral's political theories, Cor de Cabo Verde revived local performance traditions that had been oppressed during Portuguese colonialism. And they did that in order to train actors as combatants. They use that word, combatants in cultural warfare. Those cultural expressions, thank you for the call and response. Those cultural expressions were namely forms of ritual, communal, procession, music, and dance, all expressions that had been oppressed by the Portuguese and closely linked with their West African heritage. And in doing so, Fregoso positioned these fledgling theater artists. He was training them. He had an adult group, he had a teenage group, and he had a youth group, because Cape Verdeans to this day really believe in the importance of training the youth and raising them with their cultural knowledge. So by doing that, he positioned these new theater artists. Here's a picture from the 70s of them with their glorious afros. He positioned them alongside in the spirit of the freedom fighters, asserting, as Cabral did, that culture is a weapon and it's a sign of liberation. And of all the Cape Verdean theater artists I know, no one is more rooted in African critical theories and political theory than Fregoso. Throughout his writings on theater, remember those little paperback books? He supports his goals with the writings of other theater practitioners and cultural theorists. Some of these names you may recognize: Frantz Fanon, W.E.B. Du Bois, Leopold Senior, Bertolt Brecht, Auguste Boal, and Aimé Césaire. And in my article, Cape Verdean Theater, Enacting Political Theory and Reclaiming Roots for Crioulo Performance, published in the Journal of Cape Verdean Studies, I offer a first ever reconstruction of some of their historical productions based on archival research, interviews with Fregoso, interviews with members of his troupe that live on different islands, festival participant observations, and the interviews. So this is exciting. After leading the group for several years and frustrated by the lack of government support, Fregoso left Cape Verde for Lisbon, Portugal, the former metropole where he still lives to this day. And without their leader, their dynamic leader, the troupe dissolved. In the summer, this is where it gets good though. Him leaving is not good, but this is the good part. And yes, I cry at this event. In the summer of 2019, the Cape Verdean Council, located in Quincy, Mass, asked me to speak at an event in honor of Fregoso, who was going to receive a citation from the mayor of Brockton, Massachusetts, a large Cape Verdean diasporic community, for his efforts as a community leader and champion of the arts. It had been decades since many of the Cor de Cape Verde members here had seen their beloved leader, especially those who had long since immigrated to the United States. So you can imagine, yes, I cried, but I totally geeked out, like the theater history geek in me. Like, this was an event. Not only did I have the opportunity to pay tribute to someone I admire and love, but that former members from Cor de Cape Verde's youth and adult troops would be in attendance to heap love on their former director. And of course, I had to ask the former members to sing a few songs from their performance, because, you know, I still had to do some research while I was there and document their performance because the music is not written down. It was a beautiful enactment of community and love. And Fregoso's mission continues to influence the work of theater troupes, especially on the main island of Santiago. In the 80s, I look at this troupe, Juventude em Marcha, which translates as Youth on the March. They emerged in 1984, about 10 years following independence, under the direction of Georges Martins, who's here on the left, who anchored their work in comedy as a means to address political and social injustice. The troupe, the longest running one in Cape Verde, is massively popular in Cape Verde. And I had the chance to travel with them, to witness their performances on 3 different islands, from open air cement soccer stadiums to indoors at the National Auditorium in the capital city of Praia. Their comedies are wildly popular. They entertain sold out crowds. This actor, who is, you can see his mini version, his real self below, right? And they created this massive version of him for this float for Carnival. It's one of his famous characters, and he cannot walk in the streets without being stopped. And I experienced that as I walked through the streets of Mindelo, São Vicente, and Santo Antão with him. Because they have televised recordings sold as bootleg copies in Cape Verde and also throughout the diaspora. They're sort of reminiscent, for those of you who are familiar with Commedia dell'arte, they're a little bit reminiscent of the spirit of Commedia dell'arte. And they've been working together for almost 40 years now, passing roles onto younger family members. Juventude em Marcha seeks to reclaim the specificities of regional culture, like what is specific to that island, and the language of the island of Santo Antão, as well as challenge utopic dreams of emigration and this idea of this lusophonic utopia that the Portuguese language is combining, right? We have that in French too, right? That the language is going to create this ideal brotherhood and sisterhood that were united by the language of the former colonizers. So through their popular techniques and wide audience appeal, The troupe seeks to safeguard cultural memory by using performance to archive traditional practices and the idiosyncratic daily lives of Cape Verdeans. They are also, another really important part of their mission is to do tours to diasporic communities, primarily in France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Canada, and the United States. These represent sites specifically where people from Saint-Ouen went, right? Like those of you who do immigration studies know that most people go where they already have a family contact, right? So that's why you find a lot of Saint-Ouen people in the Netherlands, but not necessarily people from Brava or from Saint Vicente or from San Nicolau. So as part of their work and part of their mission, the director, Georges Martins, describes these diasporic performances as bringing a taste of home, just like I brought you some Cape Verdean food today, bringing a taste of home to generations of Cape Verdeans living outside the islands. And in fact, more exciting news, the troupe arrives next week. Yes, isn't that incredibly serendipitous that I'm doing this talk today? And next week, they arrive on the 7th to prepare for a performance on the 11th at Tolman High School in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, for a new play called Piña Macente, which focuses on these two twin brothers who are going through a lot of stuff. They're orphaned and a lot of struggles, but it will be funny. It will be very funny. And they are touring to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Waterbury, Connecticut, and Newark, New Jersey. And of course, I think you can map what the connections are, right? Diasporic hotspots. Juventude en Marcha offers its own kind of cartography, mapping the stories, the languages, the genealogies, the rituals of the Cape Verdean elders they interview and research for their work across these diasporic spaces so that home might emerge in these moments of performance and community. Like most of the people who will go don't go to the theater, but they will show up for Juventude en Marcha. They will show up, right, for a taste of home. One of their plays that I write about is this play called, that's when they performed, just to give a shot of how crowded, like they pack, both in the islands and outside the islands. They'll draw like 400 to 600 spectators. More than any other group in Cape Verde. So one of their plays that I write about is this play called Preto no Branco, which I translate as like black in white, like black and then the hyphen and white. And this play is a response to the forces of migration and globalization on this tiny archipelago. And they present the story of these two long lost brothers, here they are, who find themselves homeless in Lisbon and victims of racialized police brutality. And they're treated differently because one is lighter skinned and one is darker skinned. And there's this whole comic fracas where when the lighter skinned brother is sleeping, but they don't know they're brothers yet. Yes, we see that in Shakespeare too. When the lighter skinned brother is sleeping, his darker skinned brother blackens his face, right? And then he whitens his own face. The next morning they go out, guess who gets beat up by the cops, right? So yeah, it's common. This was their first play set outside the islands. Preto no Branco criticizes contemporary immigrant life in Portugal while also reinforcing emotional ties to the island homeland. The play is a biting satire of this ideology of we can still all be connected because we speak Portuguese. It also shows how, because of movement or when movement happens, race can get inscribed on people in ways that they didn't experience in their homeland. And it also depicts anti-Blackness in Portugal. The third thing that I look at is, oops, here we go. In the 90s and going into the early 2000s, where I look at the forces of globalization and I situate the emergence of the Grupo de Teatro Centro Cultural Português do Mindelo. I don't know why they didn't come up with another name. The theater group of the Mindelo Portuguese Cultural Center. Are we already sensing maybe something a little problematic here of who's funding them? And that this shift also happened during a huge governmental shift in Cape Verde when it went from the one party that was in power when they gained their independence, and then a new party, the Movement for Democracy, came. So I included these two images of these flags because in the first flag, like, what do you see? What stands out to you? Oh, those are corn. That's corn husks. What are the colors of? Yeah, they're Pan-African colors, right? What do we see in the color of the new flag? Right? So the troupe and the festival have been under the direction of a Portuguese theater artist who has made Cape Verde his home, João Branco, who also now is the new director of the Portuguese Cultural Center. So located in this port city of Mindelo, São Vicente, the International Theater Festival is a place where artists, local residents, national and international visitors thrive on this notion or vision of intercambio or cultural exchange. And central to this troupe's work, and sometimes problematic, is the director João Branco's approach to creolizing Western canonical works by playwrights such as Shakespeare and Chekhov. And you can see here their adaptation in Crioulo of King Lear, and they actually added a subtitle, Nhore Jabakebesa, which means like he's done gone crazy, right? He has lost his mind. So by translating Shakespeare into the Crioulo language, Cape Verdean theater artists contribute to ongoing debates about contested policies regarding the official language. And part of, I think, what he's doing here too is, and all the promotion that came out around these plays, all the headlines would say like, Shakespeare, na língua de terra, right? Crioulo Shakespeareano. The idea that the Creole language is worthy and we can do Shakespeare in the Creole language. Now, it's also problematic too, because you're also elevating, right, the work of the colonizer, and a question that the Barbadian theorist Brathwaite asks is like, what happens when we're mimicking the colonizer, right? Even when we're trying to subvert, what's happening? And for João Branco, he's not really interested in offering a post-colonial critique. He's more interested in just doing Shakespeare and what that means to commodify, to say, hey, we have done Shakespeare. And that has been in their publicity, right? We have arrived, right? We've done Shakespeare. He doesn't do, unlike Aimé Césaire's acclaimed post-colonial adaptation of The Tempest, Branco's creolizations do not attempt to deconstruct canonical works for the sake of critiquing colonial powers. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to move ahead here a little bit. We're going to skip João Branco. Say what I'm doing now is, after looking at these periods, is trying to expand the scope of my research to show and explore how Crioulo performance can bring transnational notions of Creole identities, mixed race, and Blackness into conversation. And this is the work of my book project, Crioulo Performance, Remapping Creole and Mixed Race Theater with Vanderbilt University Press. It's the first critical study in English dedicated to Cape Verdean theater. So in this work, I attempt to redirect the gaze of Creole studies from the Caribbean back across the Atlantic to the African archipelago of Cape Verde, and then back again and looking at these diasporic communities to bring all of this into question. And I'm excited about these possibilities. I also look at notions of the diaspora and race, and I include this image. It's a promotional image for a play, Adão e os Sete Pratos do Ferrugem, which is a word play on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, right? The word for dwarf in Portuguese sounds like Adam. It's a noun, and Adam is Adão, right? So he makes Adam kind of like the Snow White, and instead of Snow White being snowy and white, he makes the dwarfs, which in this case aren't dwarfs, but they're women, he makes them black. So one translation of the title could be Adam and the Sooty Black Women, or Adam and I prefer this one, Adam and the Smoking Black Women, right? I prefer that one. Thank you, Brandon. And in this work, I particularly pay attention to the plays of Mario Lucio Souza. He's also on the playlist. He's a playwright, a poet, a musician, novelist, lawyer, and former minister culture of Cape Verde. And in his play, Adão e as Sete Pretas de Ferrugem, he depicts how essentialized racial categories have excluded the title character of Adam from the Africanist movement that fueled his country's independence. He never says Cape Verde in the play, but we all know it's Cape Verde, right? Because then he goes to Portugal. And in Cape Verde, he's not Black enough for the Africanist movement. And of course, in Portugal, he's just way too Black. So he's going in between these spaces and he plays with time and space and movement. And Adam's identity crisis stems from that anxiety of being forcibly measured against a Black or Crioulo spectrum, with Africa on one end and Europe on the other. So I'm hoping that through all this work, I can offer these new sites of inquiry for theater artists that expand upon these basic understandings of African theater practices. And these threads in Cape Verdean theater, just like this is called the pano de terra. It's like a national textile. I wear it at graduation. Well, I've already graduated, but I wear it at commencement ceremonies. These threads in Cape Verdean theater, oh, did we just lose that? Sorry. These threads in Cape Verdean theater are also woven into the various facets of my identity as a scholar artist. In my focus on artists of the global majority, in my artistic practice rooted in community building, anti-racist and decolonizing practices and social justice, in the plays I direct, in nurturing a classroom community. Thank you, students, for showing up. In the classes I teach, theater for social change, translation and performance, Black theater, and mixed race. For example, in mixed race theater and film class this semester, we're good, yeah. Students will be reading a draft of Minority, a new play by Francisca de Silveira, and it's part of a trilogy of plays inspired by Cape Verde. Silveira is a Cape Verdean from Dorchester. She is a local playwright. And this play places transnational Blackness center stage with three characters: a Cape Verdean woman, they all meet in Paris, a second generation Ghanaian American female, and a Senegalese British man. And the other two plays in her trilogy are premiering this month, one at the Public Theater in New York and the other at Theater Philadelphia. So I want to give a shout out to Fran Silveira. And then these threads also show up in the community-focused social justice and transnational works of Cape Verdean theater in my second book project, one that I am co-editing with Lisa Biggs in Africana Studies at Brown University. Our book, Applied Theater and Racial Justice, Radical Imaginings for Just Communities, is an intervention to redirect the dominant theater discourses by centering the experiences and expressive cultural practices of grassroots artists and scholars of the global majority. And in doing so, like Fregoso, we seek to decenter Eurocentric practices, a mandate that extends from our work, Lisa and our work, individually and together, that's in alignment with anti-racist decolonization and reparative strategies. My wish in all this work and in sharing some of it with you here today is that in mapping these relations, you may have at least a little bit of sense of the ability of theater from Cape Verde to Cambridge to foster dialogue, archive cultural memory, nurture diasporic connections, inspire interdisciplinary collaboration, call for social justice, build communities, and use the arts in reparative and transformative strategies. Let's see if I can say this last line. And then in closing, I wish to dedicate my work. I wish to dedicate my work today and while I'm here at MIT to my family, past and present, those who crossed rivers and seas, and those who waited for them. Thank you. Thank you. Obrigada, obrigada, obrigada. And because we started on Cape Verdean time, we don't have that much time left for our converso sabe, which means good talk, good conversation, converso sabe. But I do want to open up the floor. And in doing so, I want you to think about those maps that I showed you. And I'd first like to just open up if there are any reflections, things that you were thinking of, especially for those who map their own origins in alignment with some of the places I showed you on the map. Yeah, Michelle. Oh, I think we need a mic, right? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eunice. I mean, there's so much to process there, and I look forward to the book, to be able to get into the weeds of your arguments, and it's really inspiring. And I want to learn more about all these theater producers, about your work. So thank you so much for sharing. And as you were speaking about the history of Cape Verde, you're right, absolutely. So Cape Verde is the first place where the word Crioulo was created.
Yeah.
But then when you think of the history of Cape Verde, the fact that today, so Creole is official in Haiti. It's in the law, it's Haiti's official national language, and it's one of two official languages. But then in Cape Verde, it's not.
It's not.
Even worse, well, I don't know if it's even worse, but something which is very telling is that even freedom fighters like Cabral, although he was claiming a re-Africanization of Cape Verde, he himself believed that Portuguese was superior, that Cape Verdeans needed Portuguese for the freedom. So I'm confused.
Well, I think there's a little bit more nuance with Cabral.
Please tell me.
Because this is part of the irony of Portuguese colonialism, right? So one of the first things they do is suppress culture, suppress language, right? That's one of the first things colonizers do. And then people in the colonies would then go to the metropole to study. So Cabral went to Lisbon. He went to the universities, like Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian playwright, right? Studying at the University of Leeds. So here's the irony, Michelle. I'm glad you asked that. When he was in Lisbon, he was with all these incredible other intellectuals from other Portuguese colonies. They spoke different languages, but what language did they have in common? Portuguese. So because they could speak in Portuguese, they were able to plan and envision, and that vision became a reality. Chinua Achebe says something similar too, because there's so many languages in Africa that that writing in the English language offers, it's efficacious, right? It's easier to get translated. It's easier to get a Nobel Prize if you write in English or French, right? So it seems very contradictory, but I think there's some nuance there. We can still talk some more, and we're gonna. Yeah. Right. Il faut parler. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. D'accord. Yes, Brandon.
Yes, magnificent talk. The history in it. This is a community I've known and been close to for many years. I didn't know 90% of the stuff that you said. So really, thank you for taking us through that. A couple quick things I want to hear you reflect on. You made a really interesting point about the role of Cape Verde in the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah. You said something about religion. And it's something that was done there. And I want to know if religiosity or religion pops up as a theme, or how it's dealt with in Cape Verdean theater. And then somewhat relatedly, I think one of the interesting things about creolization is like when you bring multiple groups together, and that's like also a theme of the transatlantic slave trade, right? You had independent African groups who really had nothing to do with each other having to be together. Was the populations that were on Cape Verde, do we know where they came from the West African main continent? And does that influence kind of cultural stuff going on the islands?
So let me take the first one. Actually, that group that's coming next week is Juventude de Marcha, so Portugal, also Christianized, right, through the Catholic religion. Most of the islands are named. Santo Antão is Saint Anthony, Santiago is Saint James, right? So Juventude de Marcha, they're all Catholic, and it's very much a part of what they do. Some of their comedies are very much in the spirit of people who've studied here, morality plays, right? Like French and English morality plays. They're very much in that spirit. Like the last time they came, they did a play called Partilha de Jalmes, and it has to do with like how the souls get divided up, right? And just like in this spirit of medieval morality plays, the devil is incredibly funny. He's played by that comic actor I showed you, all in red, but that wasn't the devil character, and does really like scatological stuff with his tail, you know, in the performance. But they're unapologetically Catholic. And there are some other theater companies, especially on Santiago, that are connected with churches. So there very much is that connection. And then your second question.
The question was just about like, is the island, the diversity of the West African population on the West Africa that sounds, you know, that are part of the founding of Cape Verde. I mean, was it one population or was it multiple populations? Is there any signature? Is there any signature of that in the island?
Yeah, multiple. I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but there were multiple. And in terms of the linguistic influence is mostly Wolof that influenced the hybridity of the Crioulo language. No, thank you.
So we're 2 minutes after 1 p.m. For those joining us via Zoom, thank you so much. Are there any comments or questions? I just give it a moment for those joining us virtually. I'm seeing shaking no. Great. Eunice,
I'll be sticking around.
thank you. So for those who are here in person, if you want to ask a few more questions or just give kudos to Eunice, please do so. But we will wrap up our virtual part of the presentation. And thank you so much. And don't forget, our next presentation was Java Drake, which is on Tuesday, March 21st. Thank you, everyone.